Oh, you are?
All right, we can have everybody come together. I've been personally working with the Youngs for quite some time now, at least 8 years maybe, with the School of Prophets. And as far as I can recall, Don Holsinger has been part of our school and coming almost that whole time, if I remember
Since
correctly.
dispensationalism.
Since dispensationalism. So that was one of the first courses that I taught when we were over at Highland Park, I think.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're glad to have Don do his presentation of the work that he did for his doctoral dissertation, which he has now received from Louisiana Baptist University. So let's welcome Don Holsinger.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank Jimmy for giving me the opportunity to do this, and also for putting up with my hard-headedness for 8 years on getting classes, along with his sons and daughter who have been working and happen to put up with me in some of the stuff, Rick, who helps with operations and tech, and Jimmy Jr., who was on the tour to Israel and Turkey and did a lot of the teaching with that. Of course, Jody, and of course, Judy, who keeps Jimmy in line some of the time if he can. Let me tell you how we got involved in this study in 2010, and I believe it was by divine intervention, really, because I attended a Worldview Weekend conference in Collierville, Tennessee. And at that conference, there's this guy with a beard that got up and did something with these 3 mic stands in the front. And, you know, all of a sudden, it made sense to me. And he got done that, and I sort of thought it was neat. We went home, and about a week later, I got a phone call, and you've probably got a lot of them. It was from a timeshare group. And they were looking for my mother. They said she had bought a timeshare program in Branson, Missouri, and they wanted to know when she was going to come and do it. The only problem was my mother had been in the hospital for the last 6 months, and during the time they said she bought it, so they made a mistake. My mother never bought one, okay? But they ended up transferring it to me, and then they told me if I would go that month to Branson, they would throw in an extra couple days and a couple $100 worth of tickets extra. So I told my wife, I said, you want to go to Branson? I hear they're having a conference up there, and that guy with the 3 mic stands is going to be there again, and we'll get to hear him. So we went up there, and we went to this conference, and of course Jimmy was there, and he started talking about this PASS program, and that senior adults could sign up and learn something about prophecy, get a certificate to teach it in their church. Well, I said, hey, that sounds pretty neat. I think I'll do that. And I did it. I finished the program, and we showed up here, and Jimmy was going to give me a certificate, and I said to him, I said, well, I thought this was sort of neat. What else could I do to learn? He said, well, take the master's program. And I go, I don't think I want to do that. I said, I already got an MBA. You know, I'm a marketing and management person. And, you know, he says, but you don't have one in prophecy. Well, to make a short story short, I started the program off there. And it has been an 8-year odyssey from it, from starting with dispensationalism. And you got to say, if I put through dispensationalism, I must be sticking around on it. But David, he had put up with my papers and probably burned up a couple red pens marking my papers. Some of them came back very bloody. But anyway, and I'm also going to get an opportunity to give you some examples of how a PowerPoint should not be made today, because that's what it'll be. But as I started my study, I realized that I didn't know much about prophecy. I was pretty illiterate about prophecy, which surprised me, having an MBA from a Christian university, ordained deacon, 30 years Sunday school teacher, hundreds of sermons, and I didn't know anything about it. I said, well, if I don't know it, how about the other people in the church? What do they do? So that's why I decided to entitle my thesis that I did, Why is there an absence of apocalyptic prophecy and knowledge in the teaching in the church today? Now, like I say, I have a management and marketing degree, so I'm statistical. So I had to figure out, is that true? Is there an absence? So how did I do it? I took a survey. Okay, I took a survey, and I took a survey of 600 people. I took a survey of 300 adults between the ages of 18 and 91. 50 of them were under 40, and the rest were in ascending groups, so it was an even split across that. I also took a survey of 300 youth, ages 7 through 12. They were from 19 churches in 5 states. 40% middle school, 60% high school, but they all attended churches that their leadership professed to be pre-mill, pre-trib. So that way I got an even shot on it. Now, the survey that I gave them had 15 questions, of which there was a possible 21 responses, because some have multiple responses on them. Let me show you what the results out of that survey was. Here was the results. The adults got 4.89 of 21 correct. Look at the youth, 4.13. And if you look at these two charts, you'll see that they're almost identical, aren't they? Absolutely almost identical, except the youth is slightly lower in most of the areas than the adults. Well, that's natural. I mean, who teaches the youth? The dumb adults. Okay? Let's face it. That's who does it. So they're only learning what the adults know. The other thing, let's look at this. You see there's only 2 questions that both of them had more than half of them right. What were those tough questions? One, will there be people saved during the tribulation? Yes or no? They got it, but look at that. There's 75 of them. The adults didn't even get that right. And then the other one, this surprised me on this other one. It was name the 3 parts of the satanic trio. And then I give them a multiple choice. They have 4 choices for it. Those are the only 2 questions that at least half the people got right. Now you say, well, how about these that are absolutely nothing done, right? One of those questions is, who will stand before the judgment seat of Christ? Okay? I give them a choice, the saved, the unsaved, or those written in the book of life will go to heaven, those that won't. You know? Of course, it's only the saved, but they don't know that. Another question that was very low is, what will the verdict at the great white throne justice be? You know? They blew that one too, because they don't realize it. They think everybody will stand there. They think it's all the same judgment. So anyway, I think through this I proved that we do have a problem with understanding what prophecy is, or the knowledge of prophecy. So what was the second thing I had to do? What I did is I went to 16 pastors and prophecy speakers, and I asked them 4 questions. Here's the 4 questions. Do you believe there's a lack of knowledge and teaching about apocalyptic prophecy in the church today? Everybody goes, yep. There wasn't even a question about it. Okay? If so, in your opinion, why? In your opinion, do you think pastors tend to avoid it? If so, why? And in your opinion, do you think seminaries adequately teach about this subject? If not, why? Do you believe it's possible for us to change? So those are the questions that I gave. Now, from these interviews, I came up with the top 6 reasons on why there is this, or what they thought anyway. Now, I wouldn't call them 6 reasons. I'd call them 6 excuses, but they called them 6 reasons. Now, the first one, Dr. Ken Easley talked about, he thought there was 2 periods. Dr. Ken Easley is the head of the theology section of Union University Germantown campus. He said there was 2 periods where there was a pretty good interest in end time stuff. But those periods have come and went, and people no longer believe it. Let's look at the first period. First period started in 1970, went through 1989. And what it included was, first of all, Hal Lindsey's book, The Great Lake Planet Earth. Okay, now, Hal Lindsey was pretty good, but he made sort of a mistake here partway through his ministry, because he became not a writer, but he became a prophecy predictor. Because Hal Lindsey said that the church tribulation and Armageddon would occur around 1988. And as a matter of fact, he even laid out that time frame on it. Well, it didn't. The second thing that happened during this period is we had about 26 predictions that different people made. Some were pretty influential, some were so-so. But here's one. Look at the Jehovah's Witnesses. They predicted Armageddon in 1975 and 1984. Adam Rutherford predicted the beginning of the millennium to happen in 1977. Pat Robinson, 700 Club, predicted the end of the world in 1980, the Great Tribulation in 82, worldwide economic collapse in 1985. Okay. Edgar Weisenhut's book, 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Will Be in 1988. Well, that didn't happen, so he wrote another book, 89 Reasons Why It'll Happen in 89. Fortunately, he didn't get to 90 reasons, because he stopped there. Moses David of the Children of Faith group predicted the Battle of Armageddon would happen in 1986. These are just a few examples of the 26 predictions that were made during this time frame. The final event of this period was in 1979. And it was a group of movies, and I know these because when I was working as a youth director, I used these movies in my ministry. All these movies were less than an hour long, so they made it real good to do. But they were A Thief in the Night, A Distant Thunder, Image of the Beast, and the Prodigal Planet was the last one. That's sort of off of the thing there, but Prodigal Planet was the last one. Now, that was the end of that first period. The second period started with some more prophecies, and it lasted from 1990 to the mid-2000s. Harold Camping's book, Are You Ready for the Second Coming? He predicted it to be on September 6, 1994. David Koresh, you remember him, he was a Branch Davidian cult. He predicted the end of the world in 1995. As it was, it just ended up, the Branch Davidians ended around that time frame. The rapture movement, the High-Go rapture movement, took out a full-page ad in the USA Today. They predicted the rapture to occur October 20th, 1992. F.M. Riley of the Ministry Last Call wrote a book entitled 1994, The Year of Destiny, in which he predicted the rapture in that same year. These are all new predictions. Now, we do have one group. These are who I call, okay, there's John Hinkle. There's a rabbi who predicted September 9th, 1991, Marilyn Agee's book, End of the Age. But there is the undisputed champions of predictions, and that is the Jehovah's Witnesses. They predicted the Battle of Armageddon in 1914, 1915, 1918, 1920, 1925, 1941, 1975, and 1984. Then they said they're out of the prediction business. About time, wasn't it? Unfortunately, they failed with that prediction because they once again predicted Armageddon in 94 and revised it to 1997. The next event that happened was in 1995, and you remember what that was. It's Left Behind series. Was a group of books, 15 books written by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins. Sold 60 million copies. And it predicted, it was from a premillennial, pre-trib point of view. They later on came out with a group of, I think it was 45 books for kids. The Left Behind series for kids, that sold 11 million copies. People were all excited about it. Now, most of the ones here, a few of the young people here don't remember it, but the next big event, Y2K, the millennial bug, that was when everything was going to go completely to pot. Matter of fact, I worked in an office building that the second floor of it was entirely taken up by the FedEx people that were working to make sure this did not happen. Everything was going to end. The banks were going to collapse. The retired people weren't going to get paid. Social Security wasn't going to get paid. Everything was going to go bad. It was insurmountable. We couldn't do it. Everybody got into the act. Even the comic strips got into the act. If you're a Dilbert fan, and by the way, I got permission to do this from the Dilbert Corporation. They granted me up to use up to 7 of these in my presentation, as long as it was for educational purposes only. But they came out with a series of 7 Y2K strips. So it even made Dilbert. So, you know, that's pretty good for what it is. Here was one guy talking about it. He says, Dilbert, or Ratbert, your job is to review 80 million lines of computer code. He says, you're looking for any reference to the current year. Those pieces of code would be a problem for the year 2000. Well, Ratbert reports that I'm happy to report the date did not show up once. As a matter of fact, all I found was zeros and ones. You know? It's estimated that the cost of the work done to prepare for this was $308 billion. But here's the problem. All this stuff was predicted, and none of it happened. The predictions didn't happen. What was in the books didn't happen. None of it happened. The world didn't end with Y2K. The late great permanent Earth, what that was, none of that happened. So what Dr. Easley believes is that people got worn out with the predictions and they lost interest in prophecy. So they went and started putting their efforts in other things, like what can we fight that's going to happen? Abortion, let's fight abortion. Let's fight these other things, and they turned to those. Well, the second thing that they came up with was that prophecy is divisive. One of the people that did it, Dr. Kevin Vaughn, lead pastor of Harvest Church in Memphis, here's what he wrote. He said, I think pastors avoid teaching eschatology because there are so many interpretations. It can be very divisive as a pastor takes a hardline stance on this view. It can appear to many in the church he's making an essential out of a non-essential. Now, Jimmy talked about that yesterday. He talked about secondary doctrines. And this is what he's basically talking about. A non-essential doctrine is a secondary doctrine, one we don't care about. Okay? He says, or they make it turned off by his view, and therefore pastors avoid it altogether. That is probably true. Pastors are afraid that they're going to alienate somebody in their congregation if they preach it. And there are a lot of different views out there. I looked up one website that was called soundchristian.com prophecy who's who, publishes a list. Matter of fact, Dr. You made the list. You're on there, and they actually say you're one of the good ones. So that's a surprise, isn't it? They thought you were one of the good ones. They said the first group teaches a premillennial rapture of the church, future 7-year tribulation period, 100-year reign of Jesus Christ. They list 336 people. They include John Hagee, Jimmy DeYoung, Tim LaHaye, Brandon House, David Jeremiah, John MacArthur, Vernon McGee, Reynolds Showers, Adrian Rogers, W.A. Criswell, and others. Okay? Now, there's a second group that generally agrees, but there's a third group that teaches against pre-trib rapture. Okay? And they believe it's possibly symbolic or allegorical. People like this would be Tex Mars, Kenneth Gentry, Richard Ames, Howard Camping, Pat Robinson, Hank Hanegraaff, and Scott Dreyer. There are people that take the amillennial view. The amillennial view does not believe in the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth. They do not believe in the rapture of believers, the Antichrist, or the tribulation. Now, that is pretty heavily covered. If you look at the denominations that primarily have that, Bill Koenig puts out a list of the 25 largest denominations. 5 of the top 10 are in that, and they are the Roman Catholic Church with 66 million. This was in 2004. United Methodist Church with over 8 million. The Mormon Church with over 5 million. Evangelical Lutheran Church with 5 million, and the Presbyterian Church USA 3.4 million. That's 89 million people that are amillennial. Now, there's more in the top 25. It adds up to over 100 million people in the top 25 that take an amillennial view of it. A friend of mine, when I told him what I was studying, he told me he couldn't believe anybody could believe the pre-tribulation view. He said, I just can't believe how anybody could believe that. And then, after I got home, he sent me a video. He sent me a video that was entitled, and I don't know if I put that on the slide. Maybe I did. But it was entitled, After the Tribulation, the Pre-Tribulation Rapture Fraud Exposed. Now, this was a guy named Steve Anderson. He was a pastor of a small church in Arizona, I believe it is. He's well known for his anti-government stuff, and as a matter of fact, has spent a few days in jail because of being arrested because of it. But look at what he says. The premillennial view is the work of the devil, and the Scofield Bible, which supports the premillennial view as well as dispensationalism, is a tool of the devil. Okay? He said that the premillennial, pre-tribulation view is a fraud not found in Scripture and is based on ignorance to those people that support it. Well, let's see. He's saying that people like, Jimmy, people like John MacArthur, W.A. Criswell, Tim LaHaye, Robert Jeffers, Adrian Rogers, John Hagee, Ed Hitson, John MacArthur are, let's say, Jimmy, you are ignorant and stupid because you believe that. That's what he said. Okay? But this video is a good example of the people that take some of these opposing views. Instead of attacking that view by Scripture, they attack that view by attacking the people that believe it, attacking their character, and everything else. I mean, we're talking about people like Scofield and people like, John Darby. They're going to attack these people by their character. Now, if this is the tenor of the debate, I can see why some pastors are, short about doing that. As a matter of fact, some pastors openly discourage the study of the end time. Let's look at Rick Warren in Purpose Driven Life. He said, at the bottom, he says, anyone who lets himself get involved in distractions like studying prophecy is not fit for the kingdom of God. That's in his published book. Let's look at the next one real quick, because I know I'm running out of time. If we emphasize prophecy, people will say we're overemphasizing a non-essential truth. Where do we get this from? Real quickly, I'll tell you what it was. The book that they use to teach many of the students in seminaries is Wayne Gruden's book on systematic theology. And in his book on systematic theology, he sets up a different levels of doctrines, which he says some are more important than others. This was sort of hit by Al Mohler. This is Dr. Al Mohler. Dr. Al Mohler is the president of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. He wrote an article in 2005. This is what it says, and you see the underlined portions. Which Christian doctrines and theological issues should be given the highest priority in terms of contemporary text, theological seriousness and maturity demand that we consider doctrinal issues in terms of their relative importance. Responsible Christians must determine which issues deserve first-rank attention. It says Christians are wrongly and harmfully divided. Thinking Christians must rise to the challenge of Christian maturity. We must sort the issues with a trained mind and a humble heart. Well, okay. What he's saying is, if you don't believe the way he does, then you don't have theological seriousness and maturity. You're not a responsible Christian. You wrongly and harmfully divide people. You're not a thinking Christian. You don't have Christian maturity. You don't have a trained mind and a humble. You're a pretty miserable person if you don't believe his triage that he does, which says, his triage which says that there are 3 different levels of Christian doctrines and Christian thought. And he took this from the hospital triage situation. Of course, the first level are those things that you have to have for salvation. But his last level, his 3rd level, is anything that has to do with eschatology. So that's what he puts at the very, very bottom of it. If that is true, why do we have this? And why, of the Bible, 8,352 of 31,124 verses are predictive, have to do with prophecy. That's 27%. In the book of Ezekiel, 821 and 1,273 verses to 65% are prophecy. Daniel, 45% prophecy. Revelation, 60%, 63%. The second coming is mentioned 318 times in the Old Testament or in the New Testament. Psalms, the major prophets, minor prophets, many historical books in the Old Testament are devoted to prophecy. Why did so many writers write about prophecy? Why did the writers of the New Testament write so much about prophecy? Why did Jesus speak so much about prophecy? Well, I think there's a very good reason for it. I think prophecy is important, and that's what it is. Prophecy is very important. Number 4 reason, lack of seminary training. Yes, lack of seminary training in end-time prophecy. Many of those agreed that this was a problem. If you read the book Perfect Ending, Why Your Eternal Future Matters by Robert Jeffers, he gave one of his motivations for writing the book as a pastor wrote to him, and he says, I wish you to write a book that would clearly explain prophecy, not just for lay people, but for people like me. This was a guy with a PhD degree that was a pastor. He says, I do think there's a generation of pastors who have never been taught the truth about Bible prophecy. Jesse Johnson, teaching pastor at First Baptist Church, at Springfield, Virginia, Emmanuel Baptist Church, said, also many of the seminaries teach amillennialism. There's not much emphasis on the end time. Randy White, senior pastor of First Baptist Church in Katy, Texas. Seminaries, for the most part, don't teach it because I believe there's been an abandonment of dispensational theology. Only when you read the Scripture dispensationally do you get the details of prophecy. Now, to find out whether or not this was true, I went to 3 organizations. I went to Mid-America Baptist Theological Seminary, private seminary in Cordova, Tennessee. I went to Union University Theology Department in Jackson, Tennessee, and I went to New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, an entity of the Southern Baptist Convention, and I looked at the text that they used and the curriculum they used to teach new pastors and how much prophecy is in that curriculum. Well, folks, there isn't hardly any. The only portion is in Systematic Theology 2 in the 2nd year, and that is 68 pages out of a total of 1,150 pages of the text. And that was Wayne Gruden's text on the thing. Now, Wayne Gruden is an avowed Calvinist. So he spends most of his time, whenever he talks about the rapture or any of the end times, the pre-trib or something, he talks about it, oh, well, that's something the pre-tribbers talk about. And then he goes on to try and disprove what it is. The 5th one, prophecy is difficult to understand. Well, you know, that's true. But when you don't understand something, what do? There's a normal solution. You know, kids in grade school, English and math and science is hard to understand. If you're in high school, algebra and physics is hard to understand. A seminary student, Greek is hard to understand. So what do? You don't understand something, you study it to work to understand it. But when we don't understand prophecy, what do? We simply avoid it. That's it. Don't study it. Don't try to learn it. Forget it. Get away from it. When I was getting ready to do this paper, our church was in the study of Ezekiel and Daniel. You say, hey, that's great. Look at all the prophecies you're going to see in Ezekiel and Daniel. Well, let's look at what they did in Ezekiel. This is what it was. 8 weeks, this is what was covered. Chapters 1, 2, 4 verses, 5 verses, 6 was 4 verses, then 8, 14, then 18, 24. So chapters 3, 4, 5, 7, 9 to 13, 15 to 17, 19 to 24, 26 to 27, 29 to 33, 35, 36, 38 to 42, 44 to 40. 34 chapters completely left out. They didn't even touch on them, okay? They only touched on 11 chapters, and those 11 chapters did not include prophecy. They skipped over the prophecy parts completely. The book of Daniel did basically the same thing in the book of Daniel. The book of Daniel just left out a few little minor things like the statute and the interpretation and Daniel's interpretation of all of the visions and stuff. They were all left out. Now, I talked to a guy that was one of the writers of the text, and what he said was that they're told to avoid anything that's possibly controversial. So they skip prophecy because they figured it'd be controversial. Now, because my time's running out, the other one would be style of preaching, because a lot of the pastors out there right now use topical rather than expository. Now, topical preaching to me is like a buffet. When I go to a buffet, what am I able to do? I'm able to pick what I like and take what I like. If there's something that I don't know about it, I avoid it. I don't have to. That's what topical preaching is. You can preach what you want to do. Bill Hybels, one of the leaders of the Seeker church movement, said the people in his church are customers. If they don't hear what they want to hear, they're going to be gone. And he doesn't want that to happen. Now, he has since left the ministry because of some issues that he had. But the thing was, he was more concerned with numbers, and he was more concerned with what the people thought than he was about winning souls and bringing people to it. And that's what a lot of people are. You see things like Starbucks in the church now. I mean, that's what the people want. They're going to be happy. And you see all that. Yes, sir. I'm going to. I got one more thing to hit. And let me hit one thing here at the end. I talked about some other stuff, but look at this. Theologians who a short generation ago would either ignore eschatology questions entirely or treat them disdainfully is outmoded in his thinking if he adopts such an attitude today. The easy optimism of the past generation has been shattered by 2 world wars, depression and inflation with the accompanying social and moral evils. The humanistic emphasis that has characterized the theological thinking has proven fallacious. Realism has taken the place of optimism, and the men have been forced to turn to eschatological considerations as a source of hope for a sin-covered world. You think this guy hit what we have today, don't you? Didn't he nail it on the point? Unfortunately, it was written by Dwight D. Pentecost in 1958. We didn't learn it in 1958, and we're still that way. We're still doing that. We're still not teaching it. We're still avoiding it, and I'll take questions. Yes.
I think that all of us might want to consider having that book in their library just to read through to try to reshape our ministry. What we've been talking about, the Apostle Paul is speaking to the issue. Once you came to the conclusions you did you see a way to make that change in our world?
One of the people I talked to said, if there's going to be a change, it's probably not going to come from the pulpit. It's going to have to come from the people and from the church members themselves and them demanding to do it. I know one thing that I had is, as I was getting into the study and took that survey, I had a lot of adults that came to me and said, can you do a course on this at our church? We want to learn about it. So there's a thirst for them to do it. When I did the youth thing, I did it at a conference. It took a week where the youth came in from the 19 churches, and I would give them the survey, and then they'd go off. And what was unique, after about 2 or 3 days, I'm sitting there doing the survey. It sort of eased down from people taking it. And all of a sudden, 2 or 3 kids would come over to me, and they'd go, hey, Mr. Don, did I get that right? I didn't? Well, what's the real thing? They wanted to know about it. The people want to know about prophecy. They have a thirst for knowing about it, but you're not going to get the seminaries to change. I don't know if some of these pastors are going to change because they're afraid it might hurt their attendance. So it's going to have to come from the people. And I think that's probably a pretty good statement. One pastor in Florida, I asked him if there would be a change by the pastors on this, and his comment was, no, you'll just see some books written. And that's what we've seen. We saw some books written because of all the things that are happening in the world today that are making people think about it. Anything else? Jim?
An observation that I would make traveling around the world, I run into the same issue every country I go in, and that is the resurgence of 5-point Calvinism that has taken place over the last 20 years.
Right.
And trailing in its wake is covenant theology. And so it's making its way into, then out of the seminaries, into the churches, into the pulpits, by way of 5-point Calvinism with covenant theology trailing in its wake. And so what I'm seeing is the seminaries that have been, and colleges that have been trusted in the past as dispensational, they have been moving toward 5-point Calvinism, starting with, believe it or not, starting with the student body.
Mm-hmm.
Then, because colleges are functioning as a commodity rather than as a commission to teach the Word of God, they attract students and they have theology themselves. And so they're bringing in students and they have to adjust their faculty. So I'm just making a suggestion that
Right.
information for people who are looking about where to send young people to college.
And I do have 12 of those books with me. That's all I had, so I've got 12 of them. If anybody's interested in them, I'll take care of them later. But this actually was my master's thesis that I did. My doctoral thesis was on covenant theology. So I did a study of that pretty attentive for my doctoral. Any other questions? Yes?
I think this is very good. So, my profession was a lawyer.
Okay.
So, sort of looking into theology here, it seems to me that a couple of more things go along with this. I'm raised in the First Baptist Church, okay. I don't think the churches are teaching prophecy, as you say, but neither are they teaching Genesis, where prophecy starts, and neither are they teaching the Abrahamic covenant, which is prophetic in nature,
Right.
and in effect begins the entire flow of history.
If they would
Otherwise,
teach that, yeah.
you expand it
Mm-hmm.
into those things. Just an observation. If you
I also looked at the book of Revelation and what the material we had for our life groups, and they only skipped chapters 4 through 19 in their book. They left 4 through 19 out. Matter of fact, they had this. I went to a conference of three. There was three pastors. The first day of the prophecy conference was a messianic rabbi that told how they celebrated and everything. Then we had three pastors. They're very high-profile pastors. I won't mention their names, but they're from Memphis. And the first one came in on Monday, and he said, you know, when I started the ministry, I didn't know a thing about Revelation. So I've studied and studied. I understand it now, and I'm able to preach on Revelation. And he proceeded to preach on Thessalonians and the rapture. The second guy came in. He spoke on Revelation 1, on the unveiling of God. And then the third one came in and spoke new heaven, new earth, and new Jerusalem. That was their prophecy conference. They didn't get it. Yes, sir. We about time? I got 2 minutes. Yes. Somebody have one? I don't think they're an excuse. Now, Jimmy would probably be smarter than I am. I found out since I've been doing this study that there's a lot of people smarter than I am, and I'm definitely not an expert. But I think there has been a move where people have looked, like you said, they started looking allegorically at things. And the problem with looking at things allegorically is I say it's like this. And then Richard comes and says the same thing. No, it's like this. Well, we're both right. Because allegorically is whatever you decide you want to make it. You know, well, you need as Jimmy taught us, you need a ruler. You need something to be able to referee on the thing. And that is the Bible. You know, they don't use that. They try to interpret it any way they want. So I think it's just their misinterpretation. And I think the misinterpretation makes things, Jimmy or David might have a different point on that, and I'm sure they do, but you know a better way to answer, Jimmy?
You did good. I would really like to take the time for you to ask more questions. That was very good. But we got to try to stay on schedule. So take your break now.